For the Historical Society, and I'm absolutely delighted that we can all be in one room today. Thank you all very much. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute, but please help yourself. We have water, ginger ale Coke, Diet Coke, and cookies that are individually wrapped and minced. So help yourself, take a seat, and we'll start in about 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
I can see Doris Hull is watching. Hey Doris, shout out to you. I can see Doris Hull is watching. She should be able to hear us. Someone else is watching too.
I don't know what you mean.
So this is being broadcast right now, right? People can see what's happening right now. And I can see the faces and the names at the top of the tab.
Oh, that's so, I don't know.
It's like having your own TV. My own TV station. If this works, yeah.
That would be great. That would get people engaged. That's not going to pay us much. But it's visibility, it's getting engaged in the community.
People from across.
They're smart. I'm hungry. Oh, no.
I love these little things. Yeah. They even have a little fork hidden in here.
Oh, that's where'd you get that?
Just a giant. Grocery store.
I don't get shops like giant.
No, I see you at the Walmart up in Hampstead. That's where I see you.
Well, I like these better for some things.
Oh yeah, have I seen it once? I don't know.
Walmart, I tell you right now, everything, every packet, their packaging, everything's big. And when you live by yourself,
Truly, I know that now.
guys know, it's fun.
None whatsoever.
Anybody else here that I know?
That's right. Oh, it's so good to see you, dear. How you been doing? We do. We manage. The house. It was 10 for me. So I knew you're it's coming same time. No, and this I'm still listening. I'm so glad to see you today. This is an unexpected blessing.
Well, thank you. It is.
Yeah, Chris, I'm so glad we can be physically together.
Isn't this
And
wonderful?
I miss our bereavement luncheons.
I've written down and asked her why. Haven't heard back.
No. I know. Well, people are just afraid, so this is just delightful. Oh, I'm so glad I saw you. I miss people, and of course I could pick up the phone or I could write a note, but I think about you, so I hope that's as good as no.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I met somebody last time I didn't even know, and I was being crazy.
I know. This is strange time.
I said to God the other week, I can't name everybody. You just have to know who my friends
I know my list is long. There's a lot of widows on my list. Because I don't think that anybody,
You all get together.
we used to. A luncheon, we had a luncheon through hospice. And it was just, anybody who would come in that room would not know the pain that we are going through or still have. That we just had that comfort of being together.
You know
You
what?
could cry a couple teardrops and nobody would freak out. They just
Okay, Kevin's here. We can start. Thank you again, everyone, very, very much for being here. It's such a delight to see you. Again, help yourself. There are plenty of sodas. There's Coke, Diet Coke, and regular Coke, and I assure you, if you can't see it, root around in there. And we also have a cooler full of water. We have individually wrapped cookies and mints, so please help yourself. And again, my name is Lynn Wheeler. I'm on the programming committee at the Historical Society, and I'm delighted to be here today. Our executive director is busy doing a Facebook Live of this, so she can't come up here right now, but I'll introduce her, Chris McMasters. Thank you, Chris.
I know.
And it's great to see everyone back in the room for our first box lunch talk in person for 18 months, so it's really very exciting. Before I begin, I just want to make a few announcements of upcoming events. We have our annual business meeting on November 4th, that's a Thursday, and our speaker, I'm delighted to say, is Sharon Tosi Lacey, who is the historian for the U.S. Census Bureau. And she is going to give a really fascinating talk about the census, important points along the way, and then drill down to census information about Carroll County. So we hope you will join us. You can sign up on the Historical Society website. And we are doing that by Zoom this year because we had to make the decision at the time when we just didn't think we could have a meal in person. So please plan to join us on Thursday, November 4th for that event. And also, the Historical Society has been partnering with other historical societies in the area, in Pennsylvania, and with the library to create a wonderful series of talks on train history. Correct? Mm-hmm. Chris? And so that will be the week of November 9th through the 12th, and our own Jim Schreiber will be speaking on the 12th. So be sure to check that out. You can find that on the Historical Society site, on the library site. And come on in, there are sodas, water, and everything over here. So please check that out. A partnership event I want to mention, which is very exciting, and this is going to be Zoomed through the library. But many of you in this room know Corinne Corpus. Corinne, of course, retired after many years with the Performance Food Group and is a very active member of our community. They are having a special speaker named John Ota, and he's written this book called The Kitchen, and this is going to be a fascinating look. He's traveled around the country recreating meals from historic periods in our history. And I don't have the date right in front of me right now. It is in November, but oh yeah, Chris?
It's November 1st, 7 o'clock, and if you click into our Facebook, you can watch it because we're one of the partners.
Oh, fabulous. November 1st, 8 o'clock,
7 o'clock,
and you can click in from the library or the Historical Society. So this is going to be a wonderful event for our community, and I hope you can join us. And now it is my great, great pleasure. Oh, and next month at this time we'll have Jay Graybeal talking about the development of Army insignia over time, and that's going to be a wonderful talk. So watch for more detail on that on our site. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome my friend who I admire immensely for her skills and talents, Pat Hahn. Now, Pat has been on the staff of the Westminster Branch Library for 23 years. When she joined 23 years ago, she took the ghost walks as her own baby. Since that time, she has given the ghost walks to thousands and thousands of people and wowed them with these wonderful stories. You are very lucky today because this is Pat's last year with the Carroll County Public Library. She's retiring in December. That's going to be a big loss to the library, and I'm so honored that she could be here talking about her work with the Ghost Walks for all these years. Pat is also a farmer. She's very much a horsewoman and has a great connection with animals. And she has also delighted the customers Westminster and other libraries by quite often bringing a variety of animals to the library, which always wows the house. So Pat, my great honor to welcome you up here.
Thank you so much for having me here. I have to tell you, I operate under the cover of darkness much better than with a light shining on me. So I will try to entertain you for a little bit. Before we get started, is anyone willing to admit that they believe in ghosts? By show of hands. Okay. I say I am strongly open to the possibilities. I have been told numerous stories by people that have attended the ghost walks over the years. And not everybody can be imagining these things. There has to be a basis of truth in them. Before we get started, I want to let you know these are legends that you are about to hear. I don't pretend to be historically accurate on everything you're going to hear today. They're legends. But legends have their basis in truth. The people really existed, the places really existed, and probably some of the things that happened really happened. And I'm sure that if you take one of these stories tonight and try to tell somebody else, you're going to embellish it or forget something, and it'll change a little bit more. So keep that in mind. They are legends, but they have their basis in truth. Now, what you're going to see is about a 15-minute presentation. It's going to talk about some of the stories out in the county, and then it's going to quickly hit on some of the places we would visit if we were actually walking through Westminster. And then that's where I'm going to jump back up and tell you a little bit more, kind of elaborate on some of those places. So with that being said, we'll get started with the presentation.
Welcome to Westminster, a city rich in history, education, and public service, home to McDaniel College. On the site of the old St. John's Church is the Westminster Library. The rich history of Carroll County includes many ghostly tales and legends. The stories you will hear tonight are compiled in Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County by Jesse Glass. Do you believe in ghosts? How many times have you asked yourself that question, especially on eerie nights when the wind knocks at the windows and you are all alone in the house? Did you know that Westminster has a great many ghosts? Some haven't been seen in 100 years, while some are still actively pursuing their ghostly occupations. These are more than just tales to entertain, more than just morals to learn, but reflections of our city and county. Listen well, they have much to tell us about our past and about ourselves. Many years ago, there was a breed of men who traveled, selling anything they could in their packs. The more prosperous of these men had horses and wagons. Some of these peddlers were tinkers, master storytellers, and preachers, though sometimes these very same men were drunks, thieves, and madmen. When a farmer's wife heard a knock on the door, she had to think twice before letting any of these dust-covered strangers with their cure-all tonics, books, and pots and pans into the house when her husband was away in the fields. One of these peddlers, who went by the name of Jack, traveled around Westminster and neighboring towns, selling wares, fixing clocks, and telling stories. But Jack's special calling card was a dog that accompanied him on his journeys. Jack taught the dog to dance when he whistled popular tunes, and the boys and girls followed him around the dirt roads of Westminster, begging for another show. They'd bring their mother to see the marvelous dog, and Jack would slip in some business, whistling as he wrapped his wares for an easy sale. Wherever Jack went, the dog followed, rain or shine. Of course, there is more to the story. There was a cure-all back then, Dr. Zolligoffer's vegetable purgative, which every Carroll County mother gave to her children for such things as cramps, whooping cough, constipation, measles, bee stings, and spider bites, to name a few, and it quieted them down. Soon their husbands took a liking to the stuff and drank it for the least little cold, pulled muscle, or stubbed toe, and it helped them to such an extent that they even took it when nothing was physically wrong with them. They bought and bought, keeping spare bottles locked in closets and hidden in haymows. One look at the label on old Doc Zolligoffer's purgative lets us in on the secret. It contained old-fashioned whiskey and laudanum, which is an opiate. I think you can guess by now that old Jack was carrying the stuff, more for his own use because he was addicted to it, than for the families of Carroll County. One evening, Jack and his dog stopped at a farm close to Tawnytown. The children laughed and clapped their hands as the dog tiptoed in circles behind the peddler. Jack's sack was full of merchandise and bottles. The dog played with the children all evening, while Jack showed his wares to the farmer and his wife. Then after dinner, he sat on the hearth and told stories late into the night. About midnight, Jack retired to the haymow in the farmer's barn. He lay down in the hay with his dog beside him and drank a bottle of purgative. He licked his lips and rolled his eyes. He could hear angels scratching on the roof of the barn. Or maybe they were pigeons. He reached in his pack and got another bottle, took a swig, and heard the horses talking to him in German. Then his dog sang its ABCs. "I always knew you were a smart dog," said Jack. He turned on his side and went to sleep. The farmer found Jack the next morning, curled in a knot, face blue, eyelids fluttering. Something was terribly wrong. The farmer carried Jack into the house and laid him on a bench, then left to get the doctor in Tawnytown. Jack's dog howled so much that the farmer's wife put it outside. The children tried to play with the marvelous dog, but it growled and ran into the woods. Jack died before the farmer came back with help. He did not have any friends or relatives in the area, so the farmer took up a collection among the congregation of Ball's church and buried him there in a pauper's grave between the apple tree and the road. The little dog was never seen again in an earthly form. Carroll Countyans claim that on a moonlit night you can still see the ghost of Jack's dog running between the headstones, searching for his beloved master until Judgment Day. What is today Carroll County was once home to the Susquehannock tribe of Indians. This ghost story centers around a chief called Twentybones. After a long life of service to his people, Chief Twentybones died and was buried with great ceremony near a ridge in Lineborough. The medicine men of the tribe reported that the spirits were awaiting the imminent arrival of Twentybones. There was going to be a joyous celebration and a feast among the dead, and they wished for the new chief to prepare for the event by burying bowls of food, jars of water, memorial trinkets, and pipes of the best tobacco. The spirits also stated that a great hunt for dream bear was scheduled to take place in eternity, and that it wouldn't be a bad idea if Twentybones were buried with his prize musket. That night, the medicine men placed a curse upon the grave. Whoever disturbed the body of their chief risked the vengeance of the spirit world. As time went on, the Susquehannocks left Carroll County, and the town of Lineborough began to be built up. Rumors began to circulate among the residents of the town about the great treasure hidden up there on the ridge. One man, whose name we do not know, came into town and heard these rumors. Some say he was a drifter on his way to Philadelphia. Others called him a philosopher down on his luck. Either way, the man did not believe in ghosts. He was heard to publicly scoff at the legends. One moonlit night after drinking at the local tavern, he climbed the ridge with pick and shovel, singing a merry tune. Someone asked him where he was going, and he said, "Nowhere." The next morning, an opened grave was found in the woods, a skeleton surrounded by broken pots, a broken musket, and a string of beads. Stuck in a mound of dirt was a shovel. A trail of red led off into the woods, with pools of this sticky, ochre-colored stuff everywhere, some of it dry, some of it wet. On moonlit nights, it is rumored that one can still see the ghost of Chief Twentybones hunting dream bear on Lineborough Ridge. No one knows what became of the philosopher. Perhaps he too is a member of the hunt, or perhaps he is the hunted. Around 1783, in the town of Silver Run, an old German silversmith by the name of Arwood plied his trade. He was popular with his neighbors as well as with the Susquehannock Indians because of his honest and fair dealings with all his customers. The settlers all wondered why it was that Arwood could sell his silverware so cheaply and why he always seemed to have an inexhaustible supply. They questioned among themselves, where does he get it all? One moonless night, Arwood went out into the woods, following a trackless trail and attended by 3 cautiously moving Susquehannocks. Arwood's daughter, Frida, saw him do this, but did not know where he had gone. The next day, she worried the old man by insisting that he tell her where he had gone. Finally, Arwood yielded to her insistence and told her that he would show her his secret. So that night, when the shadows were the deepest, Arwood set forth holding his lantern in one hand and leading his blindfolded daughter by the other. The way was rough. They went uphill and downhill, through brush, briars, matted vines, slippery stones, and banks. Finally, they came to a stream, and Frida insisted on being allowed to have a drink of water. She was unblindfolded and allowed to drink. While drinking, she managed to get a bit of an idea of where she was. The pair went on until they came to a cave. Upon entering, Arwood removed Frida's blindfold. The girls saw piles of glittering silver. Silver spoons, plates, jewelry, and coins. At one end of the cave gleamed the rich vein of silver from which it had all come. Arwood then spoke to his daughter, saying, "This is the mine of the Susquehannocks. They have revealed this treasure because of our old friendship, and on the condition that the secret shall never depart from our family. If the condition is broken, you and I will pay the penalty within 3 days, and the curse of the Red Men rest upon our souls, even after death." Frida swore to keep the secret. An hour before dawn, they set out for home. Frida was blindfolded again. However, she managed to break off twigs to mark the trail. When they got home, Arwood went to bed, but Frida was too excited to sleep. She eagerly anticipated telling her friend Nina all about the wonderful things she had seen. After hearing the tale, Nina convinced Frida to take her to see the treasure. Following the trail of broken twigs, the two girls made their way to the mine, not realizing that they were being followed and watched by an unseen member of the tribe. 3 days after Frida and Nina had visited the mine, Arwood's home was entered, and he and Frida were dragged from their beds by unseen hands and against their wills, made to follow the trail to the mine. Inside the cave, the silver shone blood red from the fiery torches of the Susquehannocks. Arwood and Frida were placed in the center of the circle. The Indians danced around them, making hideous chants and gyrations, until the blood of Frida and Arwood ran cold. Suddenly, the peaceful sleepers of Silver Run were awakened by two soul-piercing screams. The next day, Arwood's shop was empty. A rescue party led by Nina started for the mine. No trace of the mine or cave was ever found. It is said that even to this day, on a starless and moonless night, the good folk of Silver Run see the spirit of old Arwood in his broad-brimmed hat, carrying a lantern, eerily resembling a girl's head, and sometimes, by his side, walks the form of a girl as tall as the trees, with a column of fire rising from her shoulders. And so these restless spirits will wander back and forth over the hills until 3 men's lives have been sacrificed on Rattlesnake Hill. Not long ago, someone asked me if I'd ever had any supernatural experiences that actually affected me personally. I told them the following story. In 1954, my wife and I purchased 33 acres and an old farmhouse in Woodbine. The house consisted of 2 large rooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. We moved into the house on June 1st, 1954, along with our little 3-year-old dog. We were young and full of plans. Remodeling the house loomed not only as work, but as a wonderful adventure. After all, it was our first home. We spent the first day tramping over our acreage, drinking from the spring and moving furniture into the house. We looked at the dilapidated front porch. Well, in our minds, it was already restored, shining with fresh white paint, the roof reshingled, and plumbing installed. The hour was already late, and in our exhausted excitement, we slept soundly. But about 2 a.m., my wife woke up with a start. Our dog, who slept at the foot of the bed, was standing with raised hackles, teeth bare, and a look of fear in her eyes as she growled in the direction of the back bedroom. I awoke at the same time, and we listened as sound like measured footsteps paced back and forth in the room. Pistol in hand, I quietly went to the room, flung the door open, and found the room empty. The footsteps had stopped as soon as I touched the doorknob. The dog, however, refused to go into the room, but cowered in the doorway. We went back to bed, but slept fitfully the rest of the night. The next evening, we again worked on the house, talking enthusiastically about our plans. As twilight fell, we sat on the front porch, happily surveying the place. That night, the dog repeated her performance. We once more investigated and found the small back room empty. In the morning, my wife looked troubled. She said she'd awakened about 3 a.m. Distinctly heard a voice say hoarsely, 30 days. Puzzled and not quite believing she'd actually heard anything, we went to work on the house again. By now, with curtains, fresh paint, and carpet on the floors, the house really looked like a home. But the nights did not improve. Twice I imagined that I'd heard a voice say, 30 days. June 30th marked our first month of residence. We had been there 30 days. It was Monday, and we went to work as usual, leaving our dog in the house as always. It really did not occur to us until later that it was the 30th day we had been in the house. At about 4 o'clock, as I was working, I suddenly felt a cold chill. I went into the lounge and attempted to shake off the feeling of foreboding that gripped me. Then I returned to work at my desk. Later, driving home, I once more felt a morbid chill settling into my being. We rounded the curve, crested the hill, and my wife said, I see smoke. As we braked to a halt in front of the house, I saw our house engulfed in flames. Frantically, I sought the firemen and asked them if they'd gone into the house or had seen a small dog escape from the fire. They all replied, no. After the fire had been put out, we searched through the ashes for the remains of our dog. At last, we found a few bones in the spot where the back bedroom would have been. There was an investigation, as there usually is after a fire, and no signs of arson were found. We buried our dog's bones in the front yard under a huge pine tree. We were heartsick after all this, and we sold the property. Did the spirit of someone live there? We were never to find out. Life goes on, and we picked up the shreds and started over again. But each time I hear a siren, my heart goes out to those who have lost irreplaceable things. Pictures, mementos, and heirlooms that are remembrances of family and friends. We've told you about the ghost stories and legends surrounding the Westminster area. Now let's get a preview of the sites you will visit on tonight's Ghost Walk. The first place we will visit is the Opera House on Main Street. You will hear of a time when the building was an entertainment venue, and when, following the Civil War, it was the scene of a Southern comedian's bloody demise. Walking up Main Street, we will come to the Sheldon House, the home of an important family in Westminster. Miss Mary Sheldon was the first to record The Legend of God's Well, which you will hear tonight. Cocky's Tavern has a very colorful history and several feisty ghosts from the Civil War era. Many of the ghostly tales of this tavern revolve around pictures on the wall, the most famous being a portrait of General Ulysses S. Grant that seems to have a mind of its own, and you will hear of mysterious footsteps that can be heard on the stairway. The cemetery of Ascension Church is the site of the grave of Carroll County's most infamous resident, Lee Master. You will hear of his connection to Avondale, a home in New Windsor, and the significance of the water-filled quarry that is on the property. The courthouse has been a presence in town since 1838. We will tell you about phenomena that occur even today in the courthouse that is a reminder of a time when justice was not the only thing served here, but dinner was too. If you go into the courthouse today, you will be able to easily spot 4 fireplaces, but there are really 5. The 5th one, hidden in the basement, is connected to a legend involving chicken soup. Built in 1837, the old jail in Westminster has had many not-so-sterling citizens walk through its doors. You will hear the stories of some of these unfortunates as we stand outside the jail tonight. We hope you will recall these images of the cells in the basement as you listen to the stories of the fate of their occupants. Especially remember the exit that led to the gallows.
I hope you enjoyed that. A bunch of ladies, myself included, we made that several years ago. We hadn't the slightest idea what we were doing, but it all seemed to come together in the end. So there's so many places to start. I love storytelling. I admire anybody that has the ability to do it, and I'm kind of a hopeful storyteller. So I have to pick a few things to talk about. I know time is limited. So I want to start first with, if we were actually out on a ghost walk today, we'd go to the cemetery first, St. John's, right behind the library. I want to emphasize to you how people were dreadfully afraid of being buried alive back in the 1800s. There's actually a family, the Gist family. They live off of Gist Road as you're headed towards Friendship Valley Elementary. And Joshua Gist was so afraid of being buried alive that he made his family promise they would not bury him for 3 days. There's a reason for this. His brother Mordecai got dreadfully sick. Mordecai passed away. They put him in a casket in the parlor of the house. Now, back then, embalming wasn't a practice, so you couldn't keep a body around long, especially in the heat of the summer. But there was a special friend who had to come from some distance on horseback, and it was going to take him 3 days to arrive. So they kept Mordecai's body in the parlor for 3 days. The gentleman arrived, he went into the parlor, he sat down next to the body, and he was contemplating about things they had done in the past, memories, when he noticed something. Mordecai's hand twitched. He stared a little bit longer. Mordecai's eye moved. Mordecai was not dead. He actually recovered, married, and had children. And I believe Mordecai's portrait hangs in the Capitol building down in Annapolis, I believe. Now Joshua was so petrified of being buried alive that he would pull the casket out into the parlor of the house, he would put on his suit, he would have family and friends gather because he wanted it to be just right when he died, and then he would make them promise, do not bury me for 3 days. People were so afraid of being buried alive that there were actually groups, preservation, or a group for premature burial, prevention of premature burial. It existed down in Baltimore. There were casket designs where if someone moved, if the lid was closed, the lid would pop open. I'm not quite sure how well that works though once you've got about 6 feet of ground on top of you. People would ask to be buried with food and water. That would be me. Make sure you have plenty of food and water in there. People would have air hoses that would go down from the surface of the ground down into the casket. And then finally, there were those people that would have a rope or a string tied to their finger or their toe. It would go up out of the ground where it would be hooked to a bell. And if they were buried alive, they could move and make the bell ring to let people know that they were down there. People would ask to have nails driven between their fingernail to make sure no reaction was done. So people were dreadfully afraid of being buried alive. Now we're going to take a walk east on Main Street, and we're going to go to the Opera House. Does everybody know the Opera House? The Opera House was built in the early 1850s, I believe. Before the Opera House stood there was a tannery that stood there where they processed hides. Now, I throw in some little things that I find interesting that I've kind of picked up over the years. Where you have a tannery processing animal hides, you're bound to have flies. So one of the people on the Ghost Walk had found an article where they would pay children a penny for every fly they caught. So if I have children on tour with me, I usually bring that up, that was a good way to make money, catch flies for a penny apiece. But then Westminster decided it needed something a bit more highbrow. So the idea of an opera house came into being. It was constructed, and it served various purposes. I believe there was actually a school in there for a brief period of time. Community groups would meet there. But on weekends, it became the entertainment center for the community. They would have plays, they would have singers, they would have poets. People would pack that building. Now on this particular night, I want you to imagine, it's right after the Civil War. Tensions are still running very high in town. People supported the North, people supported the South, just like today, there was a lot of division. There's a man coming from Alabama. His job for the evening is to be dressed as a carpetbagger, He's going to step out on that stage and he's going to make fun of politicians. Imagine late night television. His name is Marshall Buell, by the way. So Marshall Buell comes out on stage and he starts telling his jokes. And there's a group of men in the back of the room who do not find him amusing at all. Someone throws something and lands at Marshall Buell's feet. So he hesitates for a little bit, starts again. Someone throws something, it hits him in the shoulder. Hesitates a little longer. People are afraid there's going to be a riot. The sheriff's called. That group of men are removed from the building. Marshall Buell continues his performance and everything's fine. He exits that building in the alleyway. He has to be in Hagerstown the next day for another performance. So how is he going to get to Hagerstown in the 1800s? By horseback. So the sheriff comes up to him and he says, you know, I'm really concerned about your safety. I think you should spend the night in the jail, wait till daybreak, and then go to Hagerstown. But he says, no, it's no big deal. This has happened to me on several occasions. I'll be fine. They shake hands and the sheriff leaves. Now later that night, somebody's coming back that alleyway alongside of the Opera House. That alleyway is still there. And they find a body back against the brick wall. It's Marshall Buell. He's actually had his throat slit from ear to ear. The sheriff, he gathers the few personal possessions and he sends them back to Alabama. But they bury Marshall Buell in an unmarked grave, in a pauper's grave, somewhere within the Westminster Cemetery. Now here's where the legend comes into play. And I always tell children who are along on my tours, legends are best told in alleyways. So we would make our way around to the alleyway of that building, and I would tell them this. If you come out into that alleyway late at night or early in the morning, say midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning, you might catch a glimpse of a figure back against the brick wall, gesturing, trying to get your attention. And at first you think that person is smiling at you, but what you're really seeing is the slit mark from ear to ear. So that is my legend of Marshall Buell. I just want to throw this in as a little bit of a side because I pick things up doing this, and some of them I find quite fascinating. The Opera House, as you know, is no longer, it used to be a printing company. And the gentleman that owned it passed away years ago. The wife put it up for sale. It went up for public auction, I can't remember the year exactly, but there were only 2 people bidding on the building, and I got the chance to go in. It was like a lifelong dream to go into the Opera House. The one part of the building is still original when you first walk in, but the rest of it had been changed. Warehouse on the first floor, the second floor, but it was the upstairs apartment that is beyond belief, or was beyond belief. It was like stepping back into the 1970s. Shag carpeting everywhere, blue shag carpeting. The bedroom had mirrors all over the place. The bathroom was like something out of a Hollywood set. But what really gets you is up there on that very top floor where that apartment is, there's a built-in swimming pool, there's a koi pond, there is a jacuzzi, and there is a tiki bar. All of that within that building, and it was just so wonderful to be able to go through it. It sold for, I believe, at auction for $320,000, sits on 4 separate parcels of ground, and I believe it's about a 30-some thousand square foot building. It recently went up for auction again, I think within the last 3 years, and it's been sold again. So we'll have to keep an eye out as to what actually happens with the Opera House. Now, we're going to go up Main Street a little bit. Since I'm limited on time, I love all of these stories, but I'm trying to pick the ones that I think might interest you the most. So we're actually going to make our way to Ascension Church. Ascension Church was built in 1844. And it's at Ascension Church that we meet probably the most known ghost in Carroll County, and that would be Lee Master. Lee Master came here from Newhall in England. He arrived in the latter part of the 1700s. He's a very wealthy man. He went down between Westminster and New Windsor. He purchased large parcels of ground. If you live in the Furnace Hills area, that I believe was part of his plantation. He built an iron furnace. I believe that iron furnace is still out there somewhere. I'm told it's caved in on itself, but someone told me it is still prevalent in the area. Now, Mr. Master didn't pay people to work on that plantation. He had slave labor, and he was known to be very cruel to the slaves he owned. There was a woman in his, a woman slave, that he, how to phrase this, he had an interest in. And she could not deny him that interest. She had a boyfriend who was a slave. He became very angry. He confronted Lee Master about this. And according to the legend, Lee Master took him and burned him alive within the iron furnace. And then supposedly took her and bricked her up alive within a wall of the house. Now, if you get a chance to read Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County, which is written by Jesse Glass, all these stories come from that little booklet. According to that, there was a renovation on that house back in the 1930s, and supposedly skeletal remains were uncovered within a wall of the house. Now, when they buried Mr. Master out there, they buried him in Avondale at his home. His casket did not stay buried. Might be a logical reason for this. There was a sinkhole out there years ago, you remember, on 31, a car actually went down into it. But for whatever reason, the casket did not stay buried. So they brought him back to Ascension Church to bless ground. Has anybody ever seen his, I believe they call that a ledger, the stone? So I have to tell you this. I've been doing the ghost walks for about 23 years. And you have a way of doing the ghost walks, and it doesn't deviate too much. The stories are pretty much the same from year to year. So to my amazement, I'm telling the story of Mr. Masters, and I arrive at the tomb. Now, in this video, you saw the ledger, and it had cracks all over. And what I usually tell people is, Lee Master was no happier at Ascension Church than he was back out there at Avondale. Those cracks get a little wider and a little wider and a little wider every year. So my feeling was he was still trying to get out. Much to my chagrin, I arrived at his cemetery, at his tomb, and there is a brand new stone on his plot there that nobody had warned me about. So here I am trying to think of how I'm going to tell ghost stories when I have a brand new stone in front of me. So here it is. There is a brand new stone. We're going to keep an eye on it every year and see if we develop any cracks. And who knows, maybe those cracks will be a little wider and a little wider. So now's a fresh start, so we're all going to have to pay attention to that gravesite. Now I do want to share this with you. If you happen to live down in that area, they say Mr. Masters still haunts that area. Very wealthy man. A lot of people think he buried his money out there. Sometimes you might see him on horseback. Sometimes you might see him with two other gentlemen with lanterns walking around trying to find his money. So you'll have to check that out one evening as you're riding down through the area. I did get a chance to go into Avondale. The owners of the house welcomed us in, took us on a brief tour. I asked if they ever experienced anything, and she told me it wasn't uncommon to be sitting in the kitchen and to hear what sounded like furniture being moved upstairs, but when they went up, there was absolutely nothing moved. She told me they went away for a weekend once. They had a friend who was a Baltimore County police officer. He was coming to the house to stay with the two big dogs they had. He got there at 6 o'clock, he called them at 10 o'clock and said, "You can pick the dogs up at my house." But the final story they told involved a little room in the house that was absolutely beautiful. Beautiful little room. I could have sat there for hours. They said they had a family reunion and an aunt went into that room and she sat down and she was only in there for about 5 minutes when she said, "I cannot stay in this room." It was a very oppressive feeling and she could not remain. So the thought is that perhaps is the room where those skeletal remains were found. Now we're going to come back out of Ascension Church and we're going to go down the street and we're going to visit the old jail. The old jail is perhaps my most favorite site. There are so many things to talk about that I get so excited I don't know which way to go or what to talk about first. So if we're standing outside the old jail, there's a grassy area there. If you're looking at the jail head-on, the grassy area is over to the left. I want to tell you that there were gallows erected on that site. There were public executions at the old jail. 3 people died by hanging in Carroll County at the jail. The first one was a woman, Rebecca McCormick. She was African American. Supposedly there was a young man who was a freed slave who was doing everything he could to get on her nerves, telling lies about her, stories about her, and she had enough. And she killed that young man. She died by hanging in, I believe it was around 1859. Unfortunately for Rebecca McCormick, the person operating the gallows really didn't know his job well, and it took her 10 minutes to pass. The second was a young man by the name of Joseph Davis, who worked on a farm out in the Linwood area. Joseph Davis became angry with the owner of that farm. He killed that man, and then he took the $500 that that man had in his possession. He told his girlfriend that that was money that he was saving for their honeymoon. He was finally arrested and taken to jail, and he would never admit, he would never tell his story. He would never reveal whether he was guilty or not until the day of the hanging. Now, I need to back up just a second. We need to understand these public executions, they sold tickets to those. They were a form of entertainment. People would pack a picnic lunch and come to watch a hanging. At his hanging, he had prepared pamphlets. His sister would buy him little things during his stay in jail to make his life easier. So as a way to pay his sister back, he put his confession in the form of pamphlets, and he sold them the day of the hanging. And then she got the money from the sale of those pamphlets. Now the third person to be killed by hanging is a young 16-year-old African-American boy by the name of Solomon Sutherland. Solomon worked in my neck of the woods in Union Mills on a farm. The man's name was Brown. Supposedly, he killed Mr. Brown. Now, I say supposedly because there's a little more to the story. When you start delving into some of the articles, supposedly, Solomon killed the owner of the farm by blunt force trauma to the head. He admitted that. He said he did it. They took him, they put him in jail. Now, for whatever reason, they exhumed the body of Mr. Brown and re-examined it, and supposedly then confirmed that he died of shotgun wounds, which the young man admitted doing that too. So there's a lot of discrepancy. A lot of people think that he was mentally challenged and really didn't understand what he was admitting to. Now, the sheriff took a liking to that young man, and he decided that he didn't want to see that execution become a public affair. So he decided that the hanging would be in April at 6:30 in the morning. He had a wall erected around the gallows so people couldn't get in, but that didn't work. They tore it down and still managed entry. And that was the last person killed by public execution in Carroll County. Now it's that young man who's said to haunt the old jail, or at least the upstairs of the old jail. When Junction worked out of the old jail, they took us for a tour of the building. And the lady in charge took us to the front of the building. When you came in the front doors, there was a bulletin board. And she told us that it wasn't uncommon for her to be putting up flyers, and they would come out perpendicular to the wall, and she said, "That'll be enough, Reuben," and they'd all float back down. She said during one of the meetings, a styrofoam coffee cup went flying across the room, out of the blue, splashed all over the wall. There's a bathroom in there, and she said it wasn't uncommon. Apparently Reuben, he was nicknamed Reuben by some Westminster High School students. I really don't know why. But apparently Solomon, or Reuben, would get great fun out of holding the bathroom door so people couldn't get in, or if you were in there, he'd hold the door so you couldn't get out. But this is the one that got me the most. As I was talking to some of the ladies who were typing away on computers, They said they would be sitting at their computer and it would feel like somebody was playing with their hair. And that was the one that gave me the chills. The fact that somebody was playing with their hair. Now, there's another story that involves the old jail as well. And it involves a man by the name of Tom Parks. He's from Tennessee. It's Christmas Eve, 1844. Tom Parks is a very large man. He causes trouble wherever he goes. He's been locked up for theft. He's been locked up for starting fights. Numerous things. Always locked up and released in no time flat. On Christmas Eve, he's in Westminster and he's tearing up one of the buildings. Someone calls for the sheriff comes, he gets a couple deputies, they take Mr. Parks and they bring him back and put him in a corner cell at the old jail. Now on Christmas Day, he hears them talking and it suddenly occurs to him that he's not getting out of jail anytime soon. They're actually going to send him to Baltimore, to the penitentiary down there, and that's where he'll be. Whether he had a knife on him, whether he made a knife out of something he found, no one knows for sure. But he killed himself in his cell on Christmas Day. So they can't just bury the body. They have to have a doctor come and sign a death certificate. So they send to Uniontown for a man by the name of Dr. Zollicoffer, who arrives in Westminster, he examines the body, he signs the death certificate. Now this is where it gets interesting. Dr. Zollicoffer practiced something called phrenology. Phrenology is the study of the curvature of the human skull. You're not totally smooth. It has dents and indentations. He believed that by studying those indentations, he could tell whether you were going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a thief. So he asked for permission to do something. And most of you can probably figure out what that was. He asked for permission to remove Mr. Parks' head and take it back to Uniontown. You can probably finish this story without me at this point, because they say, the rest of the body was buried somewhere within the area of the old jail. So the legend says that if you go out there late at night or early in the morning, you'll see the headless ghost of Tom Parks searching for his body. Does anybody here live in Uniontown? I don't know if Uniontown has a ghost walk, but perhaps they have the rest of the story. They have the head that's searching for its body. I'm not sure. I want to share one final thing. That jail was used as a jail up until 1968. It cost about $4,000 to build it. At the time it was built in 1832, I believe, or 1837, I believe. It had no running water, no electricity, no plumbing at all. Cells were in the basement of it. The sheriff and his wife lived in the upstairs. The sheriff would prepare meals for the prisoners who were housed down below. Those cells are not very big. They're still down there, and occasionally we get the chance to go into that building. If you're claustrophobic, it is not the place to be. Even with the little cell window, the walls are so thick that the light doesn't penetrate, so it's very, very dark down there. A little eerie, I must say. I actually, when I'm making sure it's cleared out, I kind of run my way from the back to the exit to get out of there. So it's one of those cells that I want to tell you about on the corner where Tom Parks supposedly was put. If you're on the outside of that building, looking at the stone wall, you'll see 3 spots of red, and it's scattered on the stone wall. Been there for 20-some years, actually longer than that. Brenda Conaway, who used to be the Children's Services Supervisor at Westminster, took me on my first tour, and she had been doing tours since the early 80s. She told me those spots never go away, and you would think that weathering would eventually take them off. A lot of people think that that's the blood of Mr. Parks that actually marks that cell. So these are my stories of Westminster. I've left a few out, but I have to leave a few out so that you'll actually come on a real ghost walk, and we can walk around the town, and I'll tell you a little bit more. So I hope you learned something today, and I hope you had a good time. And just being able to get out and in a group is a good time now.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for that excellent, excellent talk. And also, I'd like you to help me give a round of applause to Ron. Ron is up there in the control booth, and I want to tell you, this church has a very sophisticated AV system. The person who ran it for a number of years left, and Ron has worked tirelessly to figure out how it works, and everything worked perfectly today. So Ron, thank you so much. Ron also says, Pat, and maybe you want to talk to him, that this building is haunted as well. So you may want to catch up with Ron about that. A few more quick announcements before I let you go. Pat mentioned and showed a picture in the film of the Shellman House. And of course, everyone here knows Mary Shellman. Well, Kathy Beatty and Chris McMasters have worked tirelessly to create a funeral customs exhibit in the Shellman House now.
Wonderful.
And also in the Kimmie House, there is an exhibit to add to that. That is open on weekends in October. So please stop by to see the tremendous work they've done in the Shellman House and in the Kimmie House to bring this funeral customs exhibit. Also, on December 4th, the Historical Society is having an open house, and the decorating committee is working very hard to get that ready. I saw Bev Humbert here. I don't know if she's still here, but she is playing Mrs. Claus, and the incredible decorating team at the Historical Society is working on that. So be sure to mark your calendar for December 4th. The December Box Lunch Talk will feature our own Kevin Dadoff talking about the history of churches in Carroll County, and that dovetails with a historic house of worship tour that will be going on in December in partnership with Shepherd staff. So look for all those things on our website, and please don't forget to join us for the annual meeting with Sharon Tosi Lacey on the U.S. Census. And thank you again very much for coming. And by the way, Pat, if you want to know where that original gravestone is, it's in this backyard of the Historical Society. All right, good. Yeah, against the old trees. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it.